Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of the As Good As Gold podcast by Hugo. Hugo is a digital account that helps you spend, save, and invest starting with the gold. And of course, Hugo exists to bring financial well-being to everybody through wealthcare. Well, apparently, many people thought my first episode with Ben was well done. So thank you very much for leaving a good review. Because of you guys, I get to keep my job. Right? Remember that Ben, along with two others, pay my salary. So apparently, I get to work in Hugo for another day. But jokes aside, in this second episode of AGAG, I have with me here Braham Djidjelli, Chief Product Officer of Hugo, my another boss, to discuss rules to create a valuable product or service that people will actually want. Right? Creating a product and getting it to work is one thing, but creating a product that solves real needs and wants is used continuously is a feat not easy to achieve. New products and services are conceptualized or created every day. I myself also am a wannabe entrepreneur. Try to create a few stuff, have some limited successes and failures, right? So I can attest to it. Creating new products and services that people actually want is really not an easy feat. Which is why there are so many created every day, but the majority of them will either never see the light of day or even survive in the marketplace. So how do you maximize the chances, right, to create that? Now, everybody in Hugo plays a significant role in the app's development, which brought Hugo to where it is today. But Braham, a serial entrepreneur and an innovator, sits at the nexus of Hugo and is well qualified, of course, to discuss this topic. Now, Braham, I don't want to steal your thunder. Why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hey, thanks, Ramondo. Yeah, it's great just to be sat here and be able to have half an hour to have a nice chilled chat together. I've got my jasmine tea with me here, if that's okay.
I haven't got mine.
Oh.
Yeah,
this is the secret weapon. This is the secret weapon. But look, great intro. Loved what you did on the podcast last time. Great to be here, and you're going to do loads of these. Fantastic. I'm Braham Djidjelli, as you mentioned, Chief Product Officer, and very fortunate enough to be one of the co-founders here at Hugo and work with great people like yourself and the rest of the team that we're building out. I've been working in tech for a long time. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 18, so that's a very long time. I won't tell you exactly how many years that was, but it's quite a few years now. On the side, I'm also one of the mentors at the Imperial Enterprise Lab, which is in London. So that's great. Get to meet loads of other budding young entrepreneurs there as well and share all of these journeys. But yeah, that's me here in the capacity of Chief Product Officer at Hugo, obviously as a founder wearing many hats. But this is the specific lane that I'm championing for us, and having a lot of fun with it.
Just now you mentioned you said you are a mentor in the Imperial Enterprise Lab. What's that about? Can you tell me?
Okay, so have you heard of Imperial College in London?
Nope, I did not.
Yeah.
Okay, Imperial College. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, Imperial College. Yes. Imperial Enterprise Labs. No.
Yeah, so it's the Imperial College. So it's a science and technology institution. You know, it's up there with Oxbridge, and they have a specific lab, an accelerator, which they call the Enterprise Lab within the institution itself, so that all of the alumni and current students, and even some of their professors, are all in there creating spin-off companies.
Yeah, does this mean that you were from Imperial College?
No, I wasn't. I actually went to King's in London, down the road.
Okay, smart brains, smarty pants. All right.
Long time ago.
Well, okay. So thanks for coming on today. Today, we want to talk about this show. Today's episode is about how do we, for those listening, maybe you have your own product. There's a service that you want to create. I'm actually in the midst of one. So even as I interview you today, I'm learning from you as well. There are so many people out there who want to create product, create a service, create a new enterprise, but there's so much science, a bit of science, guts, and a bit of instincts that go into it, right? And I understand that when you create a product, even if you create a great product, doesn't mean that it's going to survive. So today I want to invite you to talk about your top rules on creating a kicker product. I almost went that way. Right. So yeah, tell me. Let's talk about the rules. Maybe you can start off with rule number 1. Or how are you gonna?
Okay, let me frame it a bit first. So, what goes into creating a product? Definitely love, right? Love is all you need.
Yeah.
We got. And on that, in any relationship, right? In any loving relationship, you've got to work really hard at it. And there's blood, there's sweat, there's tears. But ultimately, as long as that love's there, you're going to get there. So it is a journey. Say again?
And there's money. Blood, sweat, tears, money.
Yeah. See, when money gets in the way, that could damage a relationship, right? So we'll look at that. But look, it's a journey, right? It is a relationship. Because remember, what you're actually building is something for someone else's needs. I think that's one of the most important things to think about, actually. Because if you let your ego get in the way of the product and you start to think it's all about you and you just want to build what you want to build or what you think is cool, you can actually pollute the experience for everybody else. You've always got to remain really focused on what it is you're actually trying to solve for and the needs beyond yourselves. Now, it doesn't mean you're fixing something that's nothing to do with you. You've got to be part of it, but ultimately, it's bigger than you. And it is important to relate to it, right? So the only real pure way to empathize with something is if you have experienced it yourself. So it is slightly, I would say, easier to create a product if you're creating something that you would potentially use or you would have been a user of in the past. But the key thing is to remember that you're doing it for someone else. So I think if we're going to go through a few rules, let's sort of break down what they would be. You'd have rule 1 would be the user. Rule 2 would be the user.
Wait.
You can see where we're going here. The cardinal rule, it's the user, right?
Really? All your rules are users? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's explain for us. Rule number 1, the user.
Let's break it down. Okay.
Yeah.
So rule number 1, the user from a research perspective, right? So the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to understand what it is you're doing. What are you in business for? What is the problem? What is out there? Who is it for? Who are you targeting? And where are you targeting them? So you might have identified something that exists, but then you've got to ask yourself, who is this? Who are you really solving this for? What demographic, what psychographic, and for what territory? Is this something that's very local? Is it a B2B product? Is it a B2C product? Is it something that you want to expand into other territories? All these things are incredibly important. So rule 1 is user research and product research. Make sure you've done that. What it is you're building, why it is you're building it, who you're building it for, where are they based? I would say that is rule 1.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, right? Because there are many products and services out there that were created because the founder was doing it for him or herself, or at least for him or her, for their immediate circle of friends or family with a need. For example, I can remember the founder of YouTube created YouTube because he wanted a video depository for his own videos, his family's videos. He wanted to build a. If I didn't remember his story wrongly, right? He wanted to create that depository where he can upload his family's videos and his family can watch these videos anytime, anywhere. And then, of course, now YouTube is worth like billions. The other one I think was somewhere much closer to home. I think was Grab, where of course back then in Singapore we had problems with getting a taxi. I remember I would get really angsty because when you're hailing a taxi from the road, you can't predict when a taxi is going to come by. So the only way is to stand there and just, hope that a taxi is going to come your way and not get snatched by somebody down the road. And then, of course, came Grab Taxi. Back then, you could call one. So it takes away that unpredictableness of a taxi. You take control whether a car is coming towards you or not. So, and then that, of course, we know where Grab is right now. So you're saying that to create the first rule, user research. And a great way to do that is starting from what do we think is a need, what is our own need, and then whether there are people around us with the same need. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, it's exactly. So what you're finding there, and this is why there's so many founders that have experienced it themselves, because what they can do is then bring that genuine, authentic love and passion to the project, but then ultimately they're building it for everybody else that also has the same problem. And then they've got to make sure that it's consistent with that ongoing journey. So, for example, if you've experienced something yourself, like, the inconvenience of having to wait for a taxi and the uncertainty of not knowing when it's coming, you've got Uber that changed the game on that, right? So Uber were really the first to do that. And then you mentioned the YouTube example. YouTube also went through an iteration where it was potentially going to be a video jobs board as well. That didn't work out for them. They pivoted. So things change along the way on the journey, and then you've got to make sure you come back to the very pure objective that you're after. And obviously for us, our purpose is to improve financial well-being for everybody. And I think to bring my personal experience into Hugo,
I was about to ask you that. You read my mind.
I mean, I'm definitely somebody that would have benefited from this. And I've been through the pain, and pain is often where a lot of it comes from, of not having that financial literacy and knowledge and getting started in my investment journey in the way that I would do having started Hugo if I'd have known what I do now 10 years earlier, right? So we've got this little, often, and as early as possible mantra about getting yourself into a healthy financial habit of investing and saving regularly, and then investing that often and averaging in and just doing a little bit at a time, so that the compound returns can come back and reap huge benefits for you. And that is something that never really got drilled home to me when I was like 25. So when I was, a young professional, had the required means to do something, but just didn't get started because life got in the way. I was doing other things, entrepreneur, etc. What everybody does at this sort of age, life gets in the way. And then you have children, you get a house, get married, etc. And you start thinking, okay, I need to get an IFA in place. I need to start thinking about the future. I need to start putting those plans in. And you start on that journey, and you realize you've missed this big gap out. And this is part of what we're trying to solve for in Hugo, because genuinely there's such a huge proportion of the population that could be doing this a lot sooner and being empowered themselves to do it without having to wait for an IFA 10 years later to come and do it for them, and then having all the associated costs and constraints that come with that. So yeah, absolutely, you're right. If you've got a founder that's experienced what it is you're trying to solve for, they can obviously relate to it. And then now I've got to say, okay, we're building this for the new generation. So we're not building this for Braham 10 years ago, because that's now out of date. We're building this for Gen Z now, because Gen Z, the millennials, they're going through this, and they are the ones that need to take this journey and get this piece, this work from us now. And obviously their needs are slightly different to mine. The underlying principles are the same, but they're now in this world of crypto, right? So where are they getting their education from? Social media wasn't a thing when I was going through my 20s. Now it is. So there's this whole entire new platform and source of education. It's not coming from schools. If you're lucky, you might have sat down with your parents at the dinner table and had a chat every now and again. But failing that, unless you're a finance professional or you really have the desire to geek out on it, you're listening to socials, you're listening to your peers, and you're just following the trends. And unfortunately, some of those trends aren't particularly healthy. So right. I feel there's something we should do about that.
Yeah, so you and I agree that part of creating a great product is first kind of investing in it a little part about your own experience, right? Making it reflect a little bit of your own experience. So what is it about Hugo that reflects your own experience, your lived experiences?
Well, okay. So this leads me on to rule 2, actually. So remember I said rule 1 is the user, rule 2 is the user, but now it's what's the value proposition for the user. So we've identified the problem, we've identified the demographic, right? Where we're doing it. I mean, we're doing it in Singapore, and then we want to expand in Southeast Asia and potentially further afield. And then you go, okay, well, what is the value proposition? What is the actual problem? What is the solution we can create? What are the gain creators and the pain relievers? I don't want to get too technical because I want this to be accessible to everybody. But fundamentally, we want at Hugo to be able to take somebody on a journey. That's what I feel I would have liked, at a time that's accessible to them and that they can act on. So we want to impart and improve financial literacy for an individual, but then immediately give them an outlet to take some positive action on that in a way that is amenable to them and doesn't disrupt their behaviour too heavily, because that's also important, and we'll get onto that a bit more later. So you just think about the state of mind that the individual is in at that moment in time and go, look, you're 25 or whatever, you're early in your career, just get started on a healthy financial routine. Think about the Maslow hierarchy. So you've got the basic needs at the bottom. You've done well, you're at the point where you're at least saving some cash. Let's do the next step, which is to put a little bit in gold, give you some protection against that fiat currency, give you a hedge against the inflation. And then we'll go, okay, let's now look at some investments. Okay, all still relatively safe and stable. And then later on the journey, we can take people into the exotics. And this is what I would have wanted at the time, and what I would candidly want now for my children. What I certainly wouldn't want them to do is go, hey, just got a job, go and put 1,000 down on red or black, which is effectively what's happening in the world of crypto, because that isn't a long, sustainable game.
I find it very interesting because you mentioned part of what you think would make a great product is to recognize the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Of course, in that in the space that the product is in. In Hugo's in Hugo's case, we are talking about finance, right? Personal finance, personal savings. So obviously the bottom would be to get the basics of financials right there. It could be education, it could be savings, it could be a safe haven asset to invest in as the base.
And minimizing your debt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Vital.
Yeah. So this sounds a lot to me like a very, very different kind of CSR, corporate social responsibility, where, nowadays a lot of companies do CSR in terms of going to the beach to pick up litter, fighting climate change, activism for certain areas, which is all well and good. But what it sounds like to me here is that one area of CSR that I think some companies have forgotten is actually caring for their customers and having genuine care. Not just lip service, not just saying I'm doing it for CSR, but the main priority is the bottom line. But it sounds to me like a genuine care for the customers. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, ethics come into this as well, and that comes down to the individual and is driven by the founding team and the culture across the business. Do to others as you would expect done to yourself, right? So, not going to pump credit down people's throats, not going to pump them in something that's just all about monetization for the business, but it's getting them addicted to something quite dangerous. Have my children in mind when building this and go, look, as a parent, would you want your children to go through this journey? And if the answer is yeah, then that's fine, we're on the right track. Don't want to be too self-righteous about it, but there's genuinely an authentic and wholesome purpose behind Hugo. We have a genuine mission and a genuine vision. So the purpose, mission, vision. The purpose everything we do is about improving the financial well-being of our consumers, our Hugo heroes, as we call them. They are the heroes. Our ultimate vision that we're contributing towards, we'll never get there on our own, but the ultimate vision, financially healthy and thriving communities. More happiness, more financial health, less stress. Great. How do we get there? We help everybody develop those healthy financial habits and give them an outlet for them where they can spend, save, and invest more effectively. That is what we are doing. And there's enough space in there to align with the business objectives to be a profitable and legitimate business. It's not a charity, right? It's got to be able to stand on its own 2 feet, to be able to genuinely do some good, because we've got to survive first, right? Mm-hmm. There's a Maslow hierarchy of needs for the business as well. So we align those business objectives with the consumer objectives, and having that balance is absolutely key. There are definitely profit-driven companies that are just thinking about the benefits to the business or the wholesome benefits to the business.
At the cost of the customer.
At the cost. And when I say cost, I mean playing on things like FOMO, playing on things like gratification, playing on the sins of the user, right? It's all fun to be a consumer in the market and go, oh yeah, look, I can buy whatever I want on buy now, pay later, and I can have it tomorrow. I can have it today. Of course, they're going to lap that up. It's like sweeties in a candy shop, right? But as a responsible human being, you have to say to your friends and your families and your peers, your fellow human beings, hey, look, we all love the candy shop. I love it as much as you, but you know, let's be responsible here. Otherwise, you're going to get diabetes down the line. That's exactly the same, right? You can do that with BNPL or whatever. It's like, yeah, cool. We can all go out. We can spend money. We can gamble. We can have all the consumer and things that we want and consume and consume and consume. But what does diabetes look like in the financial world down the line? It's no savings. It's no pension. It's no fallback. It's stress. It's fear. It's not a pretty sight, and it's a lot of I wish I did this, I wish I did that. Not taking away that there should be a balance. You live for the moment, but do it in a sustainable way.
I'm glad that you went there, because I was also curious about your thoughts on BNPL. For those who are not familiar with BNPL, it means buy now, pay later. Ooh, that sounds, buy now, pay later sounds really awesome, right? You can have your thing now, you pay later, and you pay in installments. Some people would argue that if I get to pay in installments, I have more disposable income in the short term, which I can use to do other stuff. Maybe invest, and get short-term returns, and then I'll have more money. And then I'll pay off the next month's installment, and so on and so forth and so on. So ultimately, they argue that it works out for them. In fact, even better than if they had just paid it off immediately. What are your thoughts?
You've got to be incredibly disciplined to do that, right? So for the cases where that works, it's fine, but there are other cases where it doesn't, and it's the cases where it doesn't that people get really hurt, and that's what funds the business that makes it possible for everybody else, right? For every winner, there's a loser. We have to remember this. There's no such thing as a free lunch. The seesaw always has two seats. Now, in terms of BNPL, let's think about credit in general. There's absolutely a place for credit. If it's something that you need, if it's a house, if it's a car, one of the big ticket items, of course you're going to have some, well, I say of course. If you're not fortunate enough to have a large inheritance, or for some reason the means to do so on a cash outright basis, you're going to have some need for credit, and that's healthy, and it smooths the curve. Smoothing the curve is not a bad thing. But when it comes to, it tips the balance to consumerism and just consumption, and you lose track, you lose control, you can get yourself in trouble quite quickly, because you're advancing yourself. It's like invoice discounting for a business factoring. You're advancing your costs into the future. You will have to pay for it eventually. You're just pushing it forward a little bit, and catching up from that is incredibly difficult, because if you're pushing it back by a month, you then need 2 months to get yourself back to zero. So you can get yourself a little bit trapped. That's where it's a bit dangerous. And there's also the human instinct. I always like to go back to first principles, which we'll get on to in some of the later rules. Run, stun, kill mentality, right? We're animals at heart. We should be rewarded for the work that we do. There shouldn't be reward without work. This is where the dopamine comes from, the reward endorphin. Now, if you just buy something on BNPL and get it without having to work for it, you've then removed the incentive to do the work. And you're then having to work in arrears for something that you've already received. And that psychologically is less motivating for an individual to do. So there's quite a lot going on a psychological level with things like BNPL that are quite dangerous if they spiral out of control.
Yeah, definitely.
It's important that we feel fulfilled and we have things that we feel we've earned and we deserve.
Yeah, I could just imagine. Yeah, I could just imagine those. There are really unfortunately, some people who live paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. Maybe they get sucked into this BNPL thing. They subscribe to it. Maybe saying sucked into it is not a good thing, because I'm not saying BNPL is a bad thing, but I think both of us can agree that it's not for everyone. It just so happened that if somebody lives paycheck to paycheck or have very, very minimal savings, not enough to tide them over a particular crisis, and they happen to have been on the BNPL scheme, and one day for some reason they lose their job, and then that's it. Suddenly the installments catch up, and they find themselves unable to pay for the principal and the interest. And the longer they delay it, the more the interest will rack up, and then suddenly a $1,000 TV becomes a $1,500 TV. You're spending $500 more for nothing, for the same item some more.
Yeah, and money worries are like the biggest cause of stress. Everybody experiences them at some point in their life. You take all the power of compound returns, so compounding, as Einstein said, the eighth wonder of the world, all that power of compound returns, growing your value and your wealth like that, is entirely the opposite with debt.
Oh yeah, good point.
So you get compound debt. Right? So that's a dangerous thing. So you look, by all means, use credit products. Just be conscious of the consequences and the responsibilities, because rest assured, the reason that they're so valuable is because of those that default. And if you think the values are that high, it's because the pains of the people that default are so high, right? That's the only way that they monetize it. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, because we have some users, some Hugo heroes, who feedback to us saying that it's quite refreshing, our business model, because the main idea of Hugo is genuinely to help people save better, to save more for their goals, right? And then saving is one thing, but part of our product is that we don't make you save and then keep it static there, but we actually take it one step further by helping our users invest it in gold. And some of our Hugo heroes actually feedback they find it really refreshing, because it feels genuine. It feels genuine, almost unbelievable. Yeah, some of my friends asked me, "Is there a catch?" And then I said, "I'm honest. There's no catch."
Absolutely, there's no catch. There isn't a catch. Investing is obviously that's a business in itself. There are entire companies out there. That's all they do. They facilitate investments for people. There are entire companies out there that facilitate payments for people. There are entire companies out there that sell gold to people. There are entire companies out there that do all sorts of things. We just happen to do a lot of them and weave them in a way that's coherent for the individual.
Yeah, which... Okay, then now next, what's your rule number 3 then?
Yeah, so rule number 3 is again, the user, and it's testing, right? So rule number 1 was about the research. What are we doing? Who are we doing it for? Where are we doing it? Then the user, which is the value proposition, the problem, the solution, the game creators, the pain relievers, all of these good things that lead from business solution fit, which is what we think will work, into product market fit, which is sort of proof is in the pudding and it's actually being adopted by the user. And then you go, okay, we got to test. And the reason that you do that is because you want to test the acceptance of the user in what you're providing to them. So there's like a user acceptance testing piece. We're looking for things like the intuitiveness of the product. How naturally can somebody adapt to it without being told what to do, right? There's a classic book, seminal piece of work by a chap called Steve Krug called Don't Make Me Think, right? And one of the most important things in product is, can you put it in front of someone and they can achieve the specific task without it being complicated, without having to think about it, without having to be over prompted and told what to do. So we're constantly refining for that. That will then improve the adoption, and then as the adoption grows, you can test more and you start to iterate, and you end up in something we call the flywheel, because you iterate, do something, you get someone on board, that improves that, which then gives you a feedback loop, iterate again, improves, and then you just build this momentum. This is how you get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we want this positive feedback loop of continued communication with the user. What did you think of it? How could it improve? Not only by direct questions, but more by observations, because often what people say and what they think they did can be quite different to what they actually did. So there are all sorts of mechanisms we use to test what's happening and to iterate and improve and optimize. So that's rule 3.
Now this is really interesting. I think this is where many I'm just gonna fancy a guess here. I think many product and service designers may not be able to get this. I mean, doing your user research is easy. I mean, is the concept easy to understand. Doing your value proposition, I mean, literally convincing people what kind of benefit you're bringing to the market. That's also an easy concept to understand. But testing, there's so much data, and the rigor behind the data collection, the having a robust survey being done. I mean, you can do survey, but what makes you think that the survey that you're doing is robust, is good, is correct? It makes sense, right? It's actually helpful to you, and it's not feeding some kind of a blind bias. Feeding some kind of bias that you're blind to, you know. So tell us, for Hugo, how do you do this? How do you ascertain that your testing is honest, rigorous, and objective?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you say testing, you've immediately jumped to the conclusion that testing means sitting down, asking people questions, right? That's one tactic. One tactic would be to sit down and have a conversation with. Another one would be to get somebody to survey. But how about this? How about reading all of the support tickets that come in, right? So we're in the tens of thousands of users, right? So we have support tickets coming in on a constant feed. Something that I do purposefully is read the support tickets, because what the support tickets are telling you is where the friction occurred. So you look for common themes, you look for common threads, and you go, okay, this is happening on a consistent basis. We can optimize, we can improve. You haven't actually had to ask the question. The user has volunteered the information because they've come across a pain. So you have a micro challenge to solve for in that, and you apply the same methodology as you do to the big product. You just do it on a micro basis. So it could be anything, right? It could be, how do I load money into the application? It could be, how do I invite my friends? It could be all manner of things, and that's a form of testing. And then you put something else into the marketplace, and sometimes you do something we call A/B testing, where you put two solutions out to different sets of people and see which one gets the best results. So that's another way. And then you've got all of the data. So you've seen, obviously, the back-end systems we have at Hugo, huge amounts of data, all the events. being tracked and optimized so that we can visualize them holistically into the funnel flows, see where people are getting stuck, see the directions that they're going in, see the way that we can nudge them in the direction that it is intended, make sure that the intent that the user has is the outcome that they were expecting, so there's alignment, and that just comes by observing user data in the application, the behavior. So again, that's a sort of feedback loop. So you've got the actual activity that happened in the application, huge, probably the biggest driver, actually. For example, the light product that we just released, there was a big barrier to entry in sign up. We realized that people were getting a bit stuck in the process, so we broke that down into a light product and a plus product to smooth that onboarding process. Huge effect, huge impact on the results for us. An iteration through testing and feedback and analyzing data. Looking at the support tickets, another one. Sitting down, having those interviews. It could be interviews which are slightly more research-based for new products that we might want to be releasing, new features. It might be sitting down and just asking in a quorum what people think. It could be floating some ideas on the web into certain chats and discussions and just seeing how people take to them. Or it can just be direct surveys. I mean, that's just one way. So you can see there, all of the information is being fed back into the product to constantly optimize and optimize and optimize. And the more users that you get, the more feedback you get, the better it becomes. So it constantly improves and improves.
I think one of the most dangerous thing, but insidious as well, and I think it plagues quite a number of people who are auditing their own product, right? Or their own opinion is confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Right, where people subconsciously write down their survey, or rather design their survey or design their testing such that it confirms their own bias, and they're not doing it maliciously. They're not doing it out of ego. They just, it's just intuitive. It just happened to them naturally, and they don't mean for it. So how can entrepreneurs avoid this?
Yeah, great. So absolutely true. The way you frame your question is everything. And often having your questions read and framed by externals can be useful as well to remove some of those biases, because the one way to remove them is to take yourself out of the equation, right? That's one way to do it. But look, avoid the closed questions. The concept of the mum test. Don't go and ask your mum or your family what they think. They're all going to go, oh, yes, son, it's great. Brilliant. Well done. So, avoid that. Use genuine unknown individuals that are going to be the potential user. So if you're doing the testing, test relevant people, right? Make sure that they are the right type of consumer. So that's one. And then obviously write the questions in a way that doesn't lead. So you don't want it to be, try and avoid closed questions unless you absolutely need a definitive answer. And there's a specific time to do that. But you'll find the behavior of what people actually do is actually different to what they say they do. So often if you ask the same question in 3 different ways, that's when you start to net out on a more accurate answer.
Wow, all right. Yes.
Example, right? If you were to survey a sample set of 50 people and you say to them, okay, how many of you use a savings app to save regularly? And 25% of them will go, yeah, I do. Great. So you go, okay, we've got a quarter of these users that use a savings app. Later, you ask a question and you say, okay, could you write down any app that you use to do saving? And then you write down and you map that over and you go, okay, was these the same people that gave this answer that said this? And you'll start to eliminate people. And then you'll go and you'll ask a further question. You'll say, give us an example in the last month of what you did to manage your savings or whatever. And then you'll reduce it even further. So you start to really hone in on your accuracy, because depending on the cultures and the individuals that you're looking for, people find it quite difficult to say no or say that they don't do something. I think we all like to believe that we're all far more organised than we actually are. I mean, and often we're flippant with it and we just say, oh no, I don't. The reality is we're not all that sure what we actually do. So the best way is to actually observe what actually happens. So ask them to provide empirical evidence of what they've actually done, not to tell you what they think they do. Ask what they actually do and then qualify that.
Right.
And you can start to get somewhere. But one thing is for sure that you said, surveys, statistics, you can make them say whatever you want them to say. That is absolutely a serious problem, right? So these biases that you have, if you're doing a survey or if you're looking for an outcome, you will find that outcome because you can always manipulate data, not necessarily in a malicious way, like you say, but you can always confirm what you want to.
Yeah.
if you're that way inclined. So you've got to come out, you've got to take a step back from it and just observe the reality.
Wow, there's so much work that actually goes. I mean, just hearing from you already makes me feel tired, right? There's so much work that goes behind the testing. Well, my drink of choice is coffee and beer. Oh, but wow, that's really a lot of work to do. Doesn't that? So just now you said that when you do your survey, you ask questions in multiple ways, and then that's where you start to see a pattern, and the pattern won't lie, right?
You've got to think about the cadence at which you ask people questions, the time in life you're asking them a question, the time in the season you're asking them a question. There are times in the year that people are generally more optimistic, and there are other times they're more pessimistic. We're organic beings, we're seasonal beings, right? My birthday is 18th of Jan, right? And that falls in what statistically is supposed to be like the most depressing week of the year in communities that celebrate Christmas, right? So communities that celebrate Christmas and have a festive period and a New Year period in that few weeks before, then come back to work and they get the holiday blues, right? It's statistically shown that this is a time when people are at a low point in the year. So having consistency in your cadence of testing is also important. It's like asking you, Ray, on any given day, out of 10, how happy are you? And you go, oh yeah, I'm 8. And then you go, great. Our user, Ray, is 8 out of 10 happy. And you then assume that he's a happy guy all the time. And then you see him 2 weeks later, and how are you, Ray? Oh, I'm a 4. It's like, oh, okay. So you're not always up here, sometimes down here. And if I'd have only asked you that question once and built everything based on that, what about all the other times? This could be the outlier. So asking the questions consistently at different times, in a different way, with different people, these sorts of things are important as well.
I'm always a happy guy on payday.
To be fair, you're a solid 8, right?
Ooh! All right, single ladies. Braham just said I'm a solid 8. I'm open for business. No, I'm just kidding. What's your next rule, Braham?
Right, where are we?
Cardinal
rule. Right, cardinal rule of the user. Again, all about the user. Communication that we were just touching on.
Oh, yeah.
A bit of communication now. You've got to speak the language of the audience. Let's put it in crude terms, right? If you're on stage and you're trying to get a message across to a group of individuals that speak Chinese, no point delivering that message in English, right? I'm giving you a very literal example of a subtle nuance. People like to write and communicate in a way that they think is smart, is clever, right? Intelligent, or proves something. That isn't the smart thing to do. The smart thing to do is to make something as accessible to your audience as possible and keep everything super, super simple. You're not saying that your audience is incapable of understanding you. They're capable of being intelligent. They're capable of taking on board complex concepts. But who are you to ask them to put all of that mental load into your product, right? Who are you to ask them to do all that work to comprehend what you're delivering to them? Make it easy for me. If you make the experience easy and enjoyable, and I can read it and it's simple and I get it and I'm not disappointed or I'm not confused, I'm not frustrated, I'm going to enjoy it a lot more and I'm going to stick with you a lot longer. So one of the key things is communication, and communication on a level that is accessible to all of your audience, accessible and amenable. A prime example, we're working in the world of investments, we're developing our investment product. We could go nuke into the deep rabbit holes of the complexities of the investment banking world, which they've made purposefully complex for reasons that we all know. But we don't want to do that. We want to demystify it. It's not complicated. You have an income. You should save some of it. If you invest some of it, it can grow. We don't need to overcomplicate these things. We will deliver the information in a consistent and congruent way and provide the depth required for the individual, but at an appropriate time and to an individual that's at the appropriate level of consuming it. So that's one thing. Sticking to first principles, always bringing everything down to a human level. If we can play as close to the instincts as possible, everything we do is going to be adopted a lot better. For example, I can assure you, if you achieve a goal or receive a reward after having worked very hard for it, you will receive a higher dopamine kick as a serotonin to your brain than if I just gave you something for free. If you win the lottery and you win $10 million, yeah, you might be happy. But I tell you what would make you a hell of a lot happier is if you had a company that you then sold for $10 million. Then you're like, hell yeah, I'm on top of the world. I did that, I earned that, and I deserve to have it. My dopamine is up there. I got the reward as a function of the work that I put in, right? So that brings it back to the parallel between like a BNPL versus working with something. So we play on those sorts of things and we make sure that we give gratification throughout the journey and bring it down to first principles. For example, if you want somebody to adopt a technical product, you don't want to have to change their behavior too much. Behavioral change is incredibly difficult. So let's take roundups into gold, for example. So we want people to invest in gold. That's a big barrier. If you've never invested into gold, you don't know where to start. You don't know where to go. You don't know how much you need. You got no idea. Massive barrier with loads of learning.
Oh yeah, it's like the void. This void of information actually can paralyze people. People just decided, you know what, I don't know enough, then I don't do it anymore. Even though I know it's good for me, I should go and read up about it and go and actually get into it. But sometimes you just don't know. You just don't know what you don't know, and then you never try it even.
So we go, okay, how can we take people on the journey from where they are now to putting money into gold? Okay, let's have a look at what we do in our normal lives. Okay, we have our card, we go out, we spend on our card. Okay, but even cards, that's a technical thing. What did we used to do before then? Oh, we used to have cash in our pocket. We would buy something, we'd have loose change that would go back in the pocket. What would we do at the end of the day? We'd go home, we'd take that loose change out of our pocket, we'd stick it in a bottle in the corner or a money box. Okay, that's pretty fundamental. That's going right down to first principles. I had a certain amount of money, I spent a certain amount, and I had some left at the end, and I literally physically put it somewhere. That's something that people are familiar with. So this concept of spending some money, having a bit left, and then putting it in a money box at the end. But we want it to be gold, not just cash. So why not make the money box a gold vault? And people don't use cash anymore, they use cards. So they're not getting change because it's the residual change that gets left over. So let's create some change for them. So let's do a roundup. So instead of it being 450, we'll round it up to 5 and create this virtual change for you that gets put aside in your money box, but we'll skip that step and we'll put it straight into the gold vault. So what has the change been to the consumer? They go out in the morning, they buy their coffee, they get home. Oh, they've invested in gold. They didn't actually do anything different. So they've gone about their normal behavior, but all of a sudden they're investing in gold. The only thing that they've done is use their Hugo card to make that possible. Now, going down to those first principles and saying, how can we get someone that's never invested in gold to become a gold investor with the minimal amount of behavioral change possible, are the sorts of challenges that we have to undertake. And that's why we introduced roundups from the card directly into your gold vault, because there is absolutely no change to the behavior that the average human being has to do to become that investor. And do you know what the great thing is? We invest it in gold on a cadence so that they're averaging in. And we know that averaging in is also one of those things that leads to much healthier returns, because you hit those averages. You hit highs, you hit the lows, but you make sure you hit the growth curve. So just by doing all of that normal, natural first principles behavior, you're actually an advanced investor. You've gone from never knowing about investing to having never invested in gold. So all of a sudden now, I'm not only a gold investor, I'm doing it in the smartest way possible by averaging in on a regular cadence. And I don't even feel it. It's just like the loose change in my pocket. I didn't even notice it went. So that's an example of sticking to first principles and staying as close to natural human behavior and minimizing those change barriers. And that, again, plays into the communication, the UI, UX, the communication of the behavior, speaking the language of the user. And by language, it's not just vocal language, it's behavioral language as well. Don't make them think. Don't make them think. If you go buy gold, that makes them think. If you say, just spend on your card with roundups and you'll become an averaging in gold investor, great.
Yeah, just now you also mentioned that if I want to communicate to a room full of people, my idea, I have to speak their language. By language, maybe we're talking about like literal language, Mandarin, English, Hokkien, Teochew, whatever, right? The other one is the simplicity of the language, right? But then again, some people judge you whether you are knowledgeable in that field of expertise or not, based on the complexity of your language. Mm-hmm. Right? But if we speak too simple, then there might be trust issues. People will be like, you're talking so simply, I don't know whether I can trust you or not. Are you even an expert in the area?
Okay, that comes down to authenticity, credibility, trust. I understand that, right? So Richard Feynman, one of my favorite physicists, right, quantum physicist, he would say, if you can explain something in the simplest terms possible, that proves you've understood it.
Oh, yeah.
What proves you haven't understood something is if you go on forever and you never really get to the point, because that means you don't get it. If you really get something that well, you can explain it to a 5-year-old, to a 10-year-old. And this is about first principles. There's a universal language that we all speak beyond our higher mode language of vocal language, like you were saying, Mandarin, Cantonese, whatever. There are some fundamental languages in terms of our instincts and our behavior that are just human. And this is what we're talking about. We're not saying literally, we're saying communicate on as pure a basis, as primal a basis as possible with an individual. There's a place for us to show our authority in our op-ed pieces, in articles that we write. That there are ways to show that, and obviously our history and is our proof of who we are, and then the social proof that comes in of the product. That's the authority of the individual presenting, right? But if you purely and genuinely want to know if someone understands something, ask them to explain it to you in as simple terms as possible. And the simpler they can make it, the better they've understood it.
Wow, that's very insightful. Also, so to recap, there are 4 rules that you have just presented today, right? The first, of course, all 4 rules are the user. But to break it down, rule number 1 about the user is user research. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you want to know who you're building this product for, who you're appealing to, who is going to benefit the most, right? And then by knowing who, what, where are they coming from, where do they come from, what's their background, you'll be able to create a product that resonates with them. Number 2, the user. But in this case, the value proposition. What is this product supposed to? How is this product supposed to serve the user? What is the benefit the user is expected to get? What is the problem that you're addressing, and how is the solution going to fix it? Rule number 3 that you mentioned, the user, right? But this time you talk about user testing. Whether, sure, you may have a great solution to a big problem, but do the users accept it? Do the users accept your solution the way it is being presented? And does this solution create more problems, and you want to fix those? So that's the user testing. And then you mentioned the cardinal rule, the ultimate rule, the user. But in this sense, the user communication. You have a great product, you solve a great problem, you have the solution is seamless, but do the users understand what the solution is about? What this product is supposed to do? Do they understand it from a very in a very intimate manner, right? Because to you, I think I can understand where also coming from is that creating a product, the product is a physical thing. Ultimately, for people to love your product, you need them to invest into it with their being, right? It has to serve a functional need, but also serve an emotional need. Yeah,
and you can come and join the product team anytime you like, Brett.
You've
got it.
We
need you right where you are.
That will be at the expense of the customer.
You are key to getting this communication right. You know what? This is what I love about being a product company. Our team, I mean, we're so cohesive, right? I mean, we work so flat. We all contribute. We get it. It's a joy, even to be doing this. I can tell you want to learn more. We want everybody else to learn more. It's a joy. But user-centric product development, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Braham. Thank you so much for your time today. We spent in this podcast. We talked about how the top rules to create a kicker. A real product that serves people needs, right? Braham is the Chief Product Officer of Hugo. He's also the mentor at the Imperial what's that again?
Imperial Enterprise Lab.
Imperial Enterprise Lab. All right. This month I'm gonna get $100 docked off my pay.
Oh no!
I'm just kidding. Right. So Braham is the CPO of Hugo and also a mentor at the Imperial Enterprise Lab, mentoring up and coming entrepreneurs in creating their own product and running their own companies. Right. So thank you very much for tuning in. This is the As Good As Go podcast, where we invite guests from all over the place to share their experience in finance and even share their insights into their experience with money. Hugo is a digital account that helps you spend, save, and invest starting with gold. And we want to bring financial well-being to everybody through WealthCare, right? Helping everyone develop healthy financial habits where they spend smarter, save more for their goals, and grow their wealth faster. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you at the next podcast. All opinions in this podcast should not be regarded as offering any financial advice. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified financial advisor regarding the suitability of any financial strategy, taking into account their specific financial objectives, situation, or particular needs before they act upon any recommendation.